Hey guys, my name is Matsumo, and today I decided to go back and play Battlefield 4 for the first time ever since Battlefield 1 released, and I gotta say, it's good to be back. As much as I adored Battlefield 1 when it first came out, I put about 300 hours in, which admittedly is a lot. It just hasn't gripped me the same way as past Battlefield games have. You probably noticed on my channel that I haven't been posting any Battlefield 1 content because I just haven't enjoyed the game anymore. I mean, it's fun to go back every once in a while, but I just can't get myself to play it because I just haven't enjoyed the gameplay itself. I think as soon as I went back to Battlefield 4, I realized my biggest complaint, and that is that the weapons are so much more satisfying in this game. It actually feels like when you master a weapon, you are in control of your surroundings. I was able to drop people, and you guys are gonna see throughout today's video, I'm coming out of firefights where I'm killing like 3 people in a row, where in Battlefield 1, I would have been dead by maybe the second guy. Maybe I could have killed the first, but if you're overwhelmed in Battlefield, you're gonna have a hard time coming in alive. If you've mastered the weapon in Battlefield 4, you can potentially kill every single person in front of you if you play it correctly. Now, I think the biggest contributing factor to this is the random bullet deviation. I went back and played Battlefield 1 directly after this gameplay session with Battlefield 4, and it is a night and day difference. Like, the games feel completely differently. And I know that some people will say that that's a good thing because they want a different experience. If they wanted to go back and play Battlefield 4, that's what they would do. But hopefully they can also realize why a lot of people, me included, are disappointed with this different direction for the Battlefield franchise, because it is such a stark contrast from what it was in the past. Now, I know some people are gonna say, oh, you just want the M16A3 from Battlefield 3. You want assault rifles to dominate every single situation. That's not what I want. Yes, there was a problem back in the past Battlefield games where everyone was playing as the assault class because admittedly, those weapons dominated in pretty much every single type of situation. Like, I fully understand that criticism. What I don't agree with though is just the way they went about it with Battlefield 1. DICE has actually come out and said that the reason why they added in this randomness to where your bullets are landing is to ensure that the assault class doesn't excel at long range, or certain weapons aren't good at an intended distance. The problem with that though is that it has a ripple effect all the way into the territory where the gun is supposed to do well. Let's say, for example, you're playing as the assault class. You're fighting someone that's directly in front of you, you're using the weapon appropriately, which is in close encounter combat, and you aim at his shoulder. You're compensating for the recoil, you're doing everything on your part to ensure that those bullets should be landing, but because you aimed at his body, you should be hitting his shoulder, but because there's that randomness factor to where the bullets could be flying, it misses by just a little bit because there isn't a lot of bullet spread when you're up close, but it is present, and so that slight little deviation, you miss a couple of bullets and you die. And so even though this spread is not meant to hinder you in close encounter combat, it's only meant to limit you at long range, it has this ripple effect into medium and close range, and that is, I think, the reason why I haven't been very satisfied with the way that the guns perform in Battlefield 1. And so in my opinion, and this is just my opinion, I'm just kind of rambling here, I would much rather it be where your weapons are diminished at long range because of reduced damage. If the assault class was not meant to take someone out at 100 meters, well, why not make it so that the bullets do like a pathetic 5 or 10 damage? If you're needing to put in 11, 10, however many bullets to take someone out at that distance, and you're going against someone who was using a designated marksman rifle, which should excel at that long range, you're not gonna come out of it alive, but at least it feels good. At least your bullets are going where you're aiming and doesn't have this ripple effect throughout the combat in every other type of situation. And so while I fully understand that Battlefield 4's mechanics are not perfect, it does have its problems, at least for me, and at the end of the day, this is just my opinion, I find the combat to be much more satisfying because it just feels tighter. And who knows, maybe the bullet deviation isn't the culprit. It could be a wide variety of things. The fact that you just simply die faster because the guns have on average, a higher rounds per minute. They're just pumping out more lead. Maybe it's the fact that headshot multiplier is higher and headshots are rewarded more in Battlefield 4. Whatever the case though, at the end of the day, for me, I find Battlefield 4's combat to be way more enjoyable, and I miss that tight type of gameplay. Another thing that's been a pleasant surprise is Conquest. Ever since DICE decided to reinvent the wheel of their most popular game mode, it just hasn't been as enjoyable in Battlefield 1. I've had already a couple of games where the enemy was like 400 tickets above. It looked like it was a sure victory for them, but then our team rallied, we held on to the majority of the cap points, and we were able to come out on top. It was monumental, it was an amazing game, and it was because of the way that the game mode worked. You don't really ever get those in Battlefield 1 anymore. I mean, there are some situations where you're able to just completely cap out the enemy and turn it around, but if the enemy's able to get a huge lead on you, it's pretty much a sure victory. And so I think the reason why it hasn't been as satisfying in Battlefield 1 is that at some point in the middle of a game, you've realized, oh, either the enemy won or we won. Nothing we can do because of how many points they've been able to accumulate is going to allow us to come back and secure the victory. And so at some point, it just feels like the game is over, but it's not over. It's more like we're just running through the paces. We're going through the steps, but we all know that what's going to happen at the end is going to be a victory or a loss just because of the way that the game works. And I know that some people will say, oh, well, then you should have worked harder at the beginning, but sometimes the enemy just gets a good foothold. You can't push them off of that. And so they get that automatic victory because of it, and there's no way for you to return fire or to retaliate much and get the victory yourself, unless you kind of steamroll them, which just isn't going to happen very often. And so it's been a nice surprise to go back and just remember how awesome Conquest was back in the day. Knowing that even though your team is down 200 points, you can still rally, and as long as you play right, and as long as you work with your squad and your team, you can still get the victory. I miss that about Battlefield, and it still puzzles me why DICE decided to try to reinvent the wheel with their most popular mode. Another thing that's been great is the wide variety of different weapons at your fingertips. I realize this is turning into a bit of a rant against Battlefield 1. That's not what I intended this video to be. I enjoyed Battlefield 1 for what it was, but going back and being able to bounce between the F2000, switching over to the FAMAS, going over to the SAR-21, bouncing on over to the LMGs, having 10 to choose from, and while they do have their similarities, I think Battlefield 4 went a bit overboard with the amount of weapons because some of them are very, very similar to their own. It's hard to argue that even within those different categories that there isn't a lot to choose from. The F2000, for example, plays and feels differently than if I was using the FAMAS. The FAMAS, of course, is going to have a different playstyle than if I was using the AK. They all fulfill that close quarter niche. They're all meant for close quarter combat. But if you choose one over the other, and especially if you change the different attachments, you're going to have to compensate for the recoil slightly differently, and it just mixes up the combats. And so while there is a lot of similarities within the weapon categories, I found that at least they were different enough to mix it up and just make for a more enjoyable experience. One thing I did not miss, though, is commander mode and the fact that you're always staring at your minimap. This is something that I think that Battlefield 1 did very well. In Battlefield 4, if you shoot your rifle, you show up on the minimap, and so as long as the enemy is observant, they're gonna know exactly where you are. And so basically it turns into a situation where you're constantly staring down at your minimap the entire time and not surveying your surroundings and using that information to be able to figure out where the enemy is and hopefully win a firefight. On top of that, there's also commander mode, which exasperated the problem. Not only was it just inherently overpowered if your team had one and the enemy team didn't, but if they put a UAV directly on your position, all the enemy needed to do was just stare at their minimap once again, just kind of exasperating the problem to figure out where you were directly located. Also, it was never really fun to get taken out by a cruise missile. It was cool the first couple of times, but after it happened over and over again, especially when you're in the middle of a building, that got old quickly. Other than that, though, and maybe some other small issues here and there, I didn't have many complaints while I was playing the game, and I think that's just because I've forgotten how much blood, sweat, and tears DICE LA put into Battlefield 4 to make it the game that it is today. I went back thinking that grenade spam was going to be a problem. Not really. I mean, maybe on a select few maps here and there. I mean, there is still Operation Metro and Operation Lockers. Like, those still have that problem. But DICE LA did the work that they needed back in the day to make sure that that wasn't a huge issue. Grenades are still very powerful, but they're nowhere near as bad as they used to be. And so all in all, I highly recommend that if you haven't gone back and played it recently, you go back and try it. I was having a blast. It was a trip down memory lane, and honestly, it's just a fantastic first-person shooter. And so if you've been a little burnt out with Battlefield 1 and you want to try something different, I highly recommend that you give it a whirl. It may not have as large of a community as it used to be, but it's still going strong. Surprisingly, on PC, it has about as half the amount of players that Battlefield 1 does. The game's been out for, what, over 3 years now? And it has half the player base? That's pretty crazy, and I think it just speaks volumes for how good of a first-person shooter that it is. But yeah, guys, that is it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed. Let me know what you thought about what we discussed today. Do you enjoy the old Conquest system? Do you agree with me that the weapon combat back in Battlefield 4 was a little tighter and you preferred that type of system? Or do you think that Battlefield 1 is actually a step forward and you prefer that type of gameplay? Let me know down below in the comments. But yeah, guys, until tomorrow, have a good one and take it easy.